All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening, or good morning, whatever it is to you. Welcome to Classics Cut for August. It is, unfortunately, the end of our summer reading program, and we thought, as a consequence, why not read a nice adventure story for the whole family? This is Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, written in 1889 by who people consider to be America's storyteller, Mark Twain. Now, Mark Twain, even though this is not his most famous work, still knows how to read and write a good adventure yarn. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. It was in Warwick Castle that I came across the curious stranger whom I'm about to talk about. He attracted me by three things: his candid simplicity, his marvelous familiarity with ancient armor, and the restfulness of his company, for he did all the talking. We fell in together, as modest people will, in the tail of the herd that was being shown through, and he at once began to say interesting things which interested me. As he talked along, softly, pleasantly, flowingly, he seemed to drift away imperceptibly out of this world and time and into some remote era and old forgotten country. And so he gradually wove such a spell about me that I seemed to move among the specters and shadows and dust and mold of a gray antiquity, holding speech with a relic of it. Exactly as I would speak of my nearest personal friends or enemies, or my most familiar neighbors, he spoke of Sir Bedivere, Sir Bors de Ganis, Sir Lancelot of the Lake, Sir Galahad, and all the other great names of the Table Round, and how old, unspeakably old and faded and dry and musty and ancient he came to look as he went on. Presently he turned to me and said, just as one might speak of the weather, or any other common matter, "You know about transmigration of souls? Do you know about transposition of epochs and bodies?" I said I had not heard of it. He was so little interested, just as when people speak of the weather, that he did not notice whether I had made him any answer or not. There was a half moment of silence, followed immediately by the droning voice of the salaried cicerone. "Ancient Hauberk, date of the 6th century, time of King Arthur and the Round Table, seem to have belonged to the knights of Sagramore and Desirous. Observe the round hole through the chainmail in the left breast. Can't be accounted for. Supposed to have been done with a bullet since invention of firearms, perhaps as maliciously by Cromwell's soldiers." My friend smiled, not a modern smile, but one that must have gone out of general use many, many centuries ago, and muttered, apparently to himself, "Wit ye well, I saw it done." Then after a pause added, "I did it myself." By the time I had recovered from the electric surprise of this remark, he was gone. All that evening I sat by my fire at the Warwick Arms, steeped in a dream of the olden time, while the rain beat upon the windows, and the wind roared about the eaves and corners. From time to time I dipped into old Sir Thomas Malory's enchanting book, and fed at its rich feast of prodigies and adventures, breathed in the fragrance of its obsolete names, and dreamed again. Midnight being come at length, I read another tale for a nightcap, this which here follows, to wit, How Sir Lancelot slew 2 giants, and made a castle free. Anon withal came there upon him 2 great giants, well armed, all save the heads, with 2 horrible clubs in their hands. Sir Lancelot put his shield afore him, and put a stroke away of the one giant, and with his sword he clave his head asunder. When his fellow saw that, he ran away as he were wood, for fear of the horrible strokes. And Sir Lancelot after him with all his might, and smote him on the shoulder, and clave him to the middle. Then Sir Lancelot went into the hall, and there came afore him 60 ladies and damsels, and all kneeled unto him, and thanked God and him of their deliverance. "For, sir," said they, "the most part of us have been here this 7 year their prisoners, and we have worked all manner of silk works for our meat, and we are all great gentlewomen born. And blessed be the time, knight, that ever thou wert born, for thou hast done the most worship that ever did knight in the world. With that will we bear record, and we all pray you to tell us your name, that we may tell our friends who delivered us out of prison." "Fair damsels," he said, "my name is Sir Lancelot du Lac, And so he departed from them, and betaught them unto God. And then he mounted upon his horse, and rode into many strange and wild countries, and through many waters and valleys, and evil was he lodged. And at the last, by fortune, him happened against a knight to come to a fair courtlage. And therein he found an old gentlewoman that lodged him with a good will, and there he had good cheer for him and his horse. And when time was, his host brought him into a fair garret over the gate to his bed. There Sir Launcelot unarmed him, and set his harness by him, and went to bed, and anon he fell on sleep. So soon after came one on horseback, and knocked at the gate in great haste. And when Sir Launcelot heard this, he rose up, and looked out the window, and saw by the moonlight 3 knights come riding after that one man, and all lashed on him at once with swords, and that one knight turned on them knightly again, and defended him. Truly, said Sir Launcelot, yonder one knight shall I help, for it were shame for me to see 3 knights on one, and if he be slain, I am partner of his death. And therewith he took his harness, and went out at a window by a sheet down to the 4 knights. And then Sir Launcelot said on high, Turn, you knights, unto me, and leave your fighting with that knight. And then they all 3 left Sir Kay, and turned unto Sir Launcelot, and there began great battle. For they alight all 3, and strake many strokes at Sir Launcelot, and assailed him on every side. Then Sir Kay dressed him for to have holpen Sir Launcelot. Nay, sir, said he, I will none of your help. Therefore, as ye will have my help, let me alone with them. Sir Kay, for the pleasure of the knight, suffered him to do his will, and so stood aside. And then anon within 6 strokes Sir Launcelot had stricken them to the earth. And then they all 3 cried, Sir knight, we yield us unto you as man of might matchless. As to that, said Sir Launcelot, I will not take your yielding unto me, but so that ye yield you unto Sir Kay the Seneschal. On that covenant will I save your lives, and else not. Fair knight, said they, that were we loath to do, for as Sir Kay we chased him hither, and had to overcome him had ye not been. Therefore to yield us unto him were no reason. Well, as to that, said Sir Launcelot, advise you well, for ye may choose whether ye will live or die, for an ye be yielding, it shall be unto Sir Kay. Fair knight, then they said, in saving our lives we will do as thou commandest us. Then shall ye, said Sir Launcelot, on Whitsunday next coming unto the court of King Arthur, and there shall ye yield you unto Queen Guinevere, and put you all 3 in her grace and mercy, and say that Sir Kay sent you thither to be her prisoners. On the morn Sir Launcelot arose early, and left Sir Kay sleeping. And Sir Launcelot took Sir Kay's armour and his shield, and armed him. And so he went to the stable, and took his horse, and took his leave of his host, and so he departed. Then soon after arose Sir Kay, and missed Sir Launcelot. And then he espied that he had his armour and his horse. Now by my faith, I know well that he will grieve some of the court of King Arthur, for on him knights will be bold, and deem that it is I, and that will beguile them. And because of his armour and shield, I am sure I shall ride in peace. And then soon after departed Sir Kay, and thanked his host. As I laid the book down, there was a knock at the door, and my stranger came in. I gave him a pipe and a chair, and made him welcome. I also comforted him with a hot Scotch whiskey, gave him another one, and then still another, hoping always for his story. After a 4th persuader, he drifted into it himself, in a quite simple and natural way. The stranger's history. I'm an American. I was born and reared in Hartford, in the state of Connecticut. Anyway, just over the river, in the country. So I am a Yankee of the Yankees. And practical, yes, and nearly barren of sentiment, I suppose, or poetry, in other words. My father was a blacksmith, my uncle was a horse doctor, and I was both, long first. Then I went over to the great arms factory, and I learned my real trade. Learned all there was to it. Learned how to make everything. Guns, revolvers, cannon, boilers, engines, all sorts of labor-saving machinery. Why, I could make anything a body wanted. Anything in the world, it didn't matter, make any difference what. And if there wasn't any quick, newfangled way to make a thing, I could invent one, and do it as easy as folk rolling off a log. I became head superintendent, had a couple thousand men under me. Well, a man like that is a man that is full of fight. That goes without saying. With a couple thousand rough men under one has plenty of that sort of amusement. I had, anyway. At last I met my match, and I got my dose. It was during a misunderstanding conducted with crowbars and a fellow we used to call Hercules. He laid me out with a crusher alongside the head that made everything crack, and seemed to spring every joint in my skull and made it overlap its neighbor. Then the world went out in darkness, and I didn't feel anything more, and didn't know anything at all, at least for a while. When I came to again, I was sitting under an oak tree on the grass, with a whole beautiful and broad country landscape all to myself, nearly. Not entirely, but there was a fellow on a horse looking down at me, a fellow fresh out of a picture book. He was in old-time iron armor from head to heel, with a helmet on his head the shape of a nail keg with slits in it. And he had a shield and a sword and a prodigious spear. And his horse had armor on it too, and a steel horn projected from its forehead, and gorgeous red and green silk trappings that hung all around him like a bed quilt, nearly down to the floor. "Well, sir, will you just," said this fellow. "Will I which?" "Will you try a passage of arms for land or lady, or for—" "What are you giving me?" I said. "Get along back to your circus, or I'll report you." Now what does this man do but fall back a couple of 100 yards and then come rushing at me as hard as he could tear, with his nail keg bent down nearly to his horse's neck and his long spears pointed straight ahead. I saw he meant business, so I was up a tree when he arrived. He allowed that I was his property, the captive of his spirit. There was argument on his side, and the bulk of the advantage, so I judged it best to humor him. We fixed up an agreement whereby I was to go with him, and he was not to hurt me. I came down, and we started away, I walking by the side of his horse. We marched comfortably along, through glades and over brooks which I could not remember to have seen before, which puzzled me and made me wonder. And yet we did not come to any circus or sign of a circus. So I gave up the idea of a circus and concluded he was from an asylum. But we never came to an asylum, so I was up a stump, as you may say. I asked him how far we were from Hartford. They said he'd never heard of the place, which I took to be a lie, but allowed it to go at that. At the end of an hour we saw a faraway town sleeping in a valley by a winding river, and beyond it on a hill a vast gray fortress with towers and turrets, the first I'd ever seen out of a picture. "Bridgeport?" I said, pointing. "Camelot," said he. My stranger had been showing signs of sleepiness. He caught himself nodding now, and smiled one of those pathetic, obsolete smiles of his, and said, "I find I can't go on, but come with me. I've got it all written out, and you can read it if you like." In his chamber, he said, "First I kept a journal. Then by and by, after years, I took the journal and turned it into a book. How long ago that was!" He handed me his manuscript and pointed out the place where I should begin. "Begin here. I've already told you what goes before." He was steeped in drowsiness by this time. As I went out at his door, I heard him murmur sleepily, "Give you good Dan, fair sir." I sat down by my fire and examined my treasure. The first part of it, the great bulk of it, was parchment and yellow with age. I scanned a leaf particularly and saw that it was a palimpsest. Under the old dim writing of the Yankee historian appeared traces of a penmanship which was older and dimmer still, Latin words and sentences, fragments from old monkish legends evidently. I turned to the place indicated by my stranger and began to read as follows.
The Tale of the Land of the Lost, Chapter 1, Camelot. Camelot. Camelot, I said to myself. I don't seem to remember hearing of it before. Name of the asylum, likely. It was a soft, reposeful summer landscape, as lovely as a dream and as lonesome as Sunday. The air was full of the smell of flowers and the buzzing of insects and the twittering of birds. There was no people, no wagons. There was no stir of life, nothing going on. The road was mainly a winding path with hoof prints in it, and now and then a faint trace of wheels on either side of the grass, the wheels that apparently had a tire as broad as one's hand. Presently a fair slip of a girl about 10 years old, with carrack of gold hair streaming down her shoulders, came along. Around her head she wore a hoop of flame-red poppies. It was as sweet an outfit as I ever saw. What there was of it. She walked indolently along with a mind at rest, its peace reflected in her innocent face. The circus man paid no attention to her, didn't even to see her. And she was no more startled by his fantastic makeup than if she used his every day of her life. She was going on by as indifferently as she might have gone by a couple of cows. But when she happened to notice me, then there was a change. Up went her hands, and she was turned to stone. Her mouth dropped open, her eyes stared wide and timorously. She was the picture of astonished curiosity touched with fear. And there she stood gazing, in a sort of stupefied fascination, till we turned the corner of the wood and were lost to her view. That she should be startled at me instead of the other man was too many for me. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And that she seemed to consider me a spectacle and totally overlook her own merits in that respect was another puzzling thing. A display of magnanimity, too. That was surprising in one so young. There was food for thought here. I moved along as one in a dream. As we approached the town, signs of life began to appear. At intervals, we passed a wretched cabin with a thatched roof and about a small field garden patches in different states of cultivation. There were people, too, brawny men with long, coarse, uncombed hair that hung down over their faces and made them look like animals. They and the woman, as a rule, wore a coarse tow linen robe that came well below the knee, and a rude sort of sandal, and many wore an iron collar. The small boys and girls were always naked, but nobody seemed to know it. All these people stared at me, talked about me, ran through the huts and fetched out their families to gape at me, but nobody ever noticed the other fella, except to make him humble salutations and get no response for the pains. In a town where some substantial windowless houses with stones scattered among them, a wilderness of thatched cabins, the streets were mere crooked alleys and unpaved. Troops of dogs and new children played in the sun and made life a noise. Hogs roamed and rooted constantly about, and one of them lay in a reeking wallow in the middle of the main thoroughfare and suckled profoundly. Presently, there was a distant blare of military music that came nearer, still nearer, and soon a noble cavalcade wound into view, glorious with plumed helmets and flashing mail and flaunting banners and rich doublets and horses, horsecloth, and gilded spearheads, and through the muck and swine and naked brats, the joyous dogs and shabby huts, it took its gallant way, and its wake we followed. Followed through one winding alley and then another, and climbing always, till at last we gained the breezy heights where the huge castle stood. There was an exchange of bugle blasts and a parley from the walls, where men-at-arms and hauberk and morion marched back and forth with halberd at shoulder under flapping banners with the rude figure of a dragon displayed on them. And then the great gates were flung open, the drawbridge was lowered, and the head of the cavalcade swept forward under the frowning arch, and we, following, soon found ourselves in a great paved court, with towers and turrets stretching up in the blue air on all four sides. And all about us the dismount was going on, and so much greeting and ceremony, and run to and fro, and a gay display of moving and intermingling colors, and an altogether pleasant stir of noise and confusion.
And now for something completely different.
The moment I got a chance, I slipped aside privately and touched an ancient, common-looking man on the shoulder and said, in an insinuating, confidential way, "Friend, do me a kindness. Do you belong to the asylum, or are you just here on a visit or something like that?" He looked me over stupidly and said, "Marry, fair sir, me seemeth." "That will do," I said. "I reckon you are a patient." I moved away, cogitating and at the same time keeping an eye out for any chance passenger in his right mind that might come along and give me some light. I judged I had found one presently, so I drew him aside and said in his ear, if I could see the head keeper for a minute, only just a minute, prithee, do not let me. Let you what? Hinder me then, if the word please thee better. Then he went on to say he was an undercook and could not stop to gossip, though he would like for another time, for it would comfort his very liver to know where I got my clothes. As I started away, he pointed and said yonder was one who was idle enough for my purpose and was seeking me besides, no doubt. This was an airy, slim boy in shrimp-colored tights that made him look like a forked carrot. The rest of his gear was blue silk and dainty laces and ruffles, and he had long yellow curls and wore a plumed pink satin cap tilted complacently over his ear. By his look, he was good-natured. By his gait, he was satisfied with himself. He was pretty enough to frame. He arrived, looked me over with a smiling and impudent curiosity, and said he had come for me, and informed me that he was a page. Go long, I said. You ain't more than a paragraph. It was pretty severe. I was nettled. However, it never fazed him. He didn't appear to know that he was hurt. He began to talk and laugh in happy, thoughtless, boyish fashion as we walked along and made himself old friends with me at once. Asked me all sorts of questions about myself and about my clothes, but never waited for an answer. Always chattered straight ahead as if he didn't know he had asked a question and wasn't expecting a reply. Until at last, he happened to mention that he was born in the beginning of the year 513. It made me cold chills creep over. I stopped and said, a little faintly, maybe I didn't hear you right. Say that again and slow it. What year was it? 513. 513. You don't look it. Come, my boy, I am a stranger and friendless, but honest and honorable me. Are you in your right mind? He said he was. Are these other people in their right minds? He said they were. And this isn't an asylum? I mean, isn't a place where they cure crazy people? And he said it wasn't. Well then, I said, either I am a lunatic or something just as awful has happened. Now tell me, honest and true, where am I? In King Arthur's court. I waited a minute to let that idea shudder its way home and then said, and according to your notions, what year is it now? 528, 19th of June. I felt a mournful sinking at the heart and muttered, I shall never see my friends again. Never, never again. They will not be born for more than 1,300 years yet. I seemed to believe the boy. I didn't know why. Something in me seemed to believe him, my consciousness, as you might say, but my reason didn't. My reason straight away began to clamor, and that was natural. I didn't know how to go about satisfying it because I knew that the testimony of man wouldn't serve. My reason would say they are lunatics and throw their evidence out. But all of a sudden, I stumbled on the very thing just by luck. I knew that the only total eclipse of the sun in the first half of the 6th century occurred on the 21st of June AD 528 OS and began 3 minutes after 12 noon. I also knew that no total eclipse of the sun was due in what to me was the present year, i.e. 1879. So, If I could keep my anxiety and curiosity from eating the heart out of me for 48 hours, I should then find out for certain whether or not this boy was telling the truth. Wherefore, being a practical Connecticut man, I now shoved this whole problem clear out of my mind till its appointed day and hour should come, in order that I might turn all my attention to the circumstances of the present moment and be alert and ready to make the most out of them that could be made. One thing at a time is my motto, and just play that thing for all it's worth, even if you only got 2 pair and a jack. I made up my mind on 2 things. If it was still the 19th century and I was among lunatics and I could not get away, I would presently boss that asylum or know the reason why. And if, on the other hand, it was really the 6th century, all right, I didn't want any softer thing. I would boss the whole country inside of the first 3 months, for I judged I would have the start of the best educated man in the kingdom by a matter of 1,300 years and upward. I'm not a man to waste time after my mind's made up and there's work on hand, so I said to the page, "Now, Clarence, my boy, if that might happen to be your name, I'll get you to post me up a little bit if you don't mind. What is the name of that apparition that brought me here?" "My master and thine? That is the great knight and great lord Sir Kay, the Celestial, foster brother to our liege the king." "Very good. Go on and tell me everything." He made a long story of it, but the part that had immediate interest for me was this. He said I was Sir Kay's prisoner, and that in the due course of custom I would be flung into a dungeon and left there on scapt commons until my friends ransomed me, unless I chanced to rot first. I saw that the last chance had the best show, but I didn't waste any bother about that. Time was too precious. The page said further that dinner was about ended in the great hall by this time, and that as soon as the sociability and the heavy drinking should begin, Sir Kay would have me in and exhibit me before King Arthur and his illustrious knights seated at the table round, and would brag about his exploit in capturing me, and would probably exaggerate the facts a little, but it wouldn't be good form for me to correct him, and not over safe either. And when I was done being exhibited, then ho for the dungeon, but he, Clarence, would find a way to come and see me every now and then, and cheer me up, and help me get word to my friends. Ha ha! Get word to my friends! Ha! I thanked him. I couldn't do less. And about this time a lackey came to say I was wanted. So Clarence led me in and took me off to one side and sat down by me. Well, it was a curious kind of spectacle and interesting. It was an immense place and rather naked. Yes, and full of loud contrasts. It was very, very lofty. So lofty that the banners depending from the arched beams and girders away up there floated in a sort of twilight. There was a stone-railed gallery at each end, high up with musicians in the one and women clothed in stunning colors in the other. The floor was of big stone flags laid in black and white squares, rather battered by age and use and needing repair. As to ornament, there wasn't any, strictly speaking, though on the walls hung some huge tapestries which were probably taxed as works of art. Battle pieces they were, with horses shaped like those which children cut out of paper or create in gingerbread, with men on them in scale armor, whose scales are represented by round holes, so that the man's coat looks as if it had been done with a biscuit punch. There was a fireplace big enough to camp in, and its projecting sides and hood of carved and pillared stonework had the look of a cathedral door. Along the wall stood men-at-arms in breastplate and morion, with halberds for their only weapon, rigid as statues, and that is what they looked like. In the middle of this groined and vaulted public square was an oaken table, which they called the Table Round. It was as large as a circus ring, and around it sat a great company of men dressed in such various and splendid colors that it hurt one's eyes to look at them. They wore their plumed hats right along, except that whenever one addressed himself directly to the king, he lifted his hat just a trifle as he was beginning his remark. Mainly they were drinking from entire ox horns, but a few were still munching bread or gnawing beef bones. There was about an average of 2 dogs to 1 man, and these sat in expectant attitudes till a spent bone was flung to them, and then they went for it by brigades and divisions with a rush, and there ensued a fight which filled the prospect with a tumultuous chaos of plunging heads and bodies and flashing tails, and a storm of howlings and barkings deafened all speech for the time. But that was no matter, for the dog fight was always a bigger interest anyway. The men rose sometimes to observe it the better and bet on it, and the ladies and the musicians stretched themselves out over their balusters with the same object, and all broke into lighted ejaculations from time to time. In the end, the winning dog stretched himself out comfortably with his bone between his paws, and proceeded to growl over it, and gnaw at it, and grease the floor with it, just as 50 others were already doing. And the rest of the court resumed their previous industries and entertainments. As a rule, the speech and behavior of these people were gracious and courtly, and I noticed that they were good and serious listeners when anybody was telling them anything. I mean, in a dog-fightless interval, of course. And plainly, too, they were childlike and innocent lot, telling lies of the stateliest pattern with a most gentle and winning naivete, and ready and willing to listen to everybody else's lie and believe it, too. It was hard to associate them with anything cruel or dreadful, and yet they dealt in tales of blood and suffering with a guileless relish that made me almost forget to shudder. I was not the only prisoner present. There were 20 more. Poor devils, many of them were maimed, hacked, carved in a frightful way, and their hair, their faces, their clothing were caked with black and stiffened drenchings of blood. They were suffering sharp physical pains, of course, and weariness, and hunger and thirst, no doubt, and at least none had given them the comfort of a wash, or even the poor charity of a lotion for their wounds, and yet you never heard them utter a moan or a groan, or saw them show any sign of restlessness or any disposition to complain. The thought was forced upon me, the rascals, they have served other people so in their day. It being their turn now, they were not expecting any better treatment than this. So their philosophical bearing is not an outcome of mental training, intellectual fortitude, reasoning. It is a mere animal training. They are nothing more than white Indians.
Chapter 3, Knights of the Round Table. Mainly the Round Table talk was monologues, narrative accounts of the adventures in which these prisoners were captured and their friends and backers killed and stripped of their steeds and armor. As a general thing, as far as I could make out, these murderous adventures were not forays undertaken to avenge injuries, nor to settle old disputes or sudden failings out. No, as a rule, they were simply duels between strangers. Duels between people who had never even been introduced to each other, and between whom existed no cause of offense whatever. Many a time I had seen a couple of boys, strangers, meet by chance and say simultaneously, "I can lick you," and go at it on the spot. But I had always imagined until now that that sort of thing belonged to children only, and was a sign and mark of childhood. But here were these big boobies sticking to it and taking pride in it clear up into full age and beyond. Yet there was something very engaging about these great simple-hearted creatures, something attractive and lovable. There did not seem to be brains enough in the entire nursery, so to speak, to bait a fish hook with. But you didn't seem to mind that after a little, because you soon saw that brains were not needed in a society like that, and indeed would have marred it, hindered it, spoiled its symmetry, perhaps rendered its existence impossible. There was a fine manliness observable in almost every face, and in some a certain loftiness and sweetness that rebuked your belittling criticisms and stilled them. A most noble benignity and purity reposed in the countenance of him they called Sir Galahad, and likewise in the king's also. And there was majesty and greatness in the giant frame and high bearing of Sir Lancelot of the Lake. There was presently an incident which centered the general interest upon this Sir Lancelot. At a sign from a sort of master of ceremonies, 6 or 8 of the prisoners rose and came forward in a body and knelt on the floor and lifted up their hands toward the ladies' gallery and begged the grace of a word with the queen. The most conspicuously situated lady in that massed flower bed of feminine show and finery inclined her head by way of assent. And then the spokesman of these prisoners delivered himself and his fellows into her hands for free pardon, ransom, captivity, or death, as she in her good pleasure might elect. And this, as he said, he was doing by command of Sir Kay the Seneschal, whose prisoners they were, he having vanquished them by his single might and prowess in sturdy conflict in the field. Surprise and astonishment flashed from face to face all over the house. The queen's gratified smile faded out at the name of Sir Kay, and she looked disappointed. And the page whispered in my ear with an accent and manner expressive of extravagant derision, "Sir Kay, forsooth! You call me pet names, dearest. Call me a marine. In twice 1,000 years shall the unholy invention of man labor in odds to beget the feather to this majestic lie." Every eye was fastened with severe inquiry upon Sir Kay, but he was equal to the occasion. He got up and played his hand like a major, and took every trick. He said that he would state the case exactly according to the facts. He would tell the simple, straightforward tale without comment of his own. "And then," said he, "if ye find glory and honor due, you will give it unto him who is the mightiest man of his hands that ever bare shield or strake with sword in the ranks of Christian battle, even him that sitteth there." And he pointed to Sir Lancelot. Ah, he fetched him. It was a rattling good stroke. Then he went on and told how Sir Lancelot, seeking adventures some brief time gone by, killed 7 giants at one sweep of his sword, and set 142 captive maidens free, and then went further, still seeking adventures, and found him, Sir Kay, fighting a desperate fight against 9 foreign knights, and straightway took the battle solely into his own hands and conquered the 9. And in that night Sir Lancelot rose quietly and dressed him in Sir Kay's armor, and took Sir Kay's horse and gat him away into distant lands, and vanquished 16 knights in one pitched battle and 34 in another. And all these, in the former 9, he made to swear that about Whitsuntide they would ride to Arthur's court and yield them to Queen Guinevere's hands as captives of Sir Kay the Seneschal, spoil of his knightly prowess. And now here were these 6, and the rest would be along as soon as they might be healed of their desperate wounds. Well, it was touching to see the queen blush and smile, and look embarrassed and happy, and fling furtive glances at Sir Lancelot that would have got him shot in Arkansas to a dead certainty. Everybody praised the valor and magnanimity of Sir Lancelot, and as for me, I was perfectly amazed that one man all by himself should have been able to beat down and capture such battalions of practiced fighters. I said as much to Clarence, but this mocking featherhead only said, "And Sir Kay had had time to get another skin of sour wine into him. You had seen the account doubled." I looked at the boy in sorrow, and as I looked I saw the cloud of a deep despondency settle upon his countenance. I followed the direction of his eye, and saw that a very old and white-bearded man, clothed in a flowering black gown, had risen and was standing at the table upon unsteady legs, and feebly swaying his ancient head and surveying the company with his watery and wandering eye. The same suffering look that was in the page's face was observable in all the creatures round. The look of dumb creatures who know that they must endure and make no moan.
Mary, we shall have it again, sighed the boy. That same old weird tale that he hath told 1,000 times in the same words, and that he will tell till he dieth, every time he hath gotten his barrel full, and feeleth his exaggeration bill a working. What god I had died or I saw this day?
Well, who is it?
Merlin, the mighty lion magician, but he should singe him for the wittiness he worketh with this one tale. But that men fear him for that he called the storms and the lightnings and all the devils that be in hell are at his beck and call. They would have dug out his entrails many years ago to get at that tale and squelch it. He telleth always in the third person too, making believe he is too modest to glorify himself. Maledictions light upon him, misfortune be his dole. Good friend, prithee call me for even so.
The boy nestled himself upon my shoulder and pretended to go to sleep. The old man began his tale, and presently the lad was asleep in reality. So were all the dogs in the court, the lackeys, and the files of man in arms. The droning voice roamed on. A soft snoring rose on all sides and supported it like a deep and subdued accompaniment of wind instruments. Some heads were bowed upon folded arms. Some lay back with open mouths that issued unconscious music. The flies buzzed and bit unmolested. The rats swarmed out from underneath 100 holes and pattered about and made themselves at home everywhere. And one of them sat like a squirrel on the king's head and held a bit of cheese in its hands and nibbled it and dribbled the crumbs in the king's face with naive and impudent irreverence. It was a tranquil scene, and restful to the weary eye and jaded spirit. This was the old man's tale. He said, Right so the king of Mullen departed, and went unto an hermit that was a good man and a great leech. So the hermit salved all his wounds and gave him good salves. So the king was there 3 days, and then were his wounds well amended that he might ride and go, and so departed. And as they rode, Arthur said, I have no sword. No force, said Mullen. Hereby is a sword that shall be yours in a May. So they rode till they came to a lake, the which was a fair water and broad. And in the midst of the lake Arthur was ware of an arm clothed in white samite that had a fair sword in that hand. Lo, said Merlin, yonder is that sword I spake of. With that they saw a damsel growing upon the lake. What damsel is that? Said Arthur. That is a lady of the lake, said Merlin. And within that lake is a rock, and with therein is as fair a place as any on earth, and richly be seen. And this damsel will come to you anon, and then speak ye fair to her that she will give you that sword. Anon withal came the damsel unto Arthur, and saluted him, and he her again. Damsel, said Arthur, what sword is that yonder the arm holdeth above the water? I would it would be mine, for I have no sword. Sir Arthur King, said the damsel, that sword is mine, and if ye will give me a gift when I ask it you, ye shall have it. By my faith, said Arthur, I will give you what give ye ask. Well, said the damsel, get ye into yonder barge and row yourself to the Lord, and take it and the scabbard with you, and then I will ask my gift when I see my time. So Sir Arthur and Merlin alight, and tied their horses to 2 trees, and so they went into the ship, and when they came to the sword that the hand held, Sir Arthur took it up by the handles, and took it with him. And the arm and the hand went under the water, and so they came unto the land, and rode forward. And then Sir Arthur saw a rich pavilion. What signifieth yonder pavilion? It is a knight's pavilion, said Merlin, that you fought with last, Sir Pellinore. But he is out, he is not there. He hath to do with a knight of yours that hight Eglame, and they have fought together. But at the last Eglame fled, else he had been dead, and he hath chased him even unto Carlion, and we shall meet with him anon on the highway. And that is well said, said Arthur. Now I have a sword, now will I wage battle with him, and be avenged on him. Sir, ye shall not so, said Merlin, for the knight is weary of fighting and chasing, so that ye shall have no worship to have to do with him. Also, he will not lightly be matched of one night living, and therefore it is my counsel, let him pass, and his sons after his days. Also, ye shall see that day in short space, ye shall be right glad to give him your sister to wed. When I see him, I will do as ye ask me, said Arthur. Then Sir Arthur looked upon the sword, and liked it passing well. Whether like you better, said Merlin, the sword or the scabbard? Me like as a sword. Better, said Arthur. Ye are most unwise, said Merlin, for the scabbard is worth 10 of the sword. For while ye have the scabbard upon you, ye shall never lose no blood, being never sore wounded. Therefore keep well the scabbard always with you. So they rode into Carlion, and by the way they had met with Sir Pellinore. But Merlin had done such a craft that Pellinore saw not Arthur, and he passed by without any words.
I marvel, said Arthur, that the knight would not speak. Sir, said Merlin, he saw you not, and he saw you, he had not lightly departed. So they came unto Carleon, whereof his knights were passing glad. And they heard of his adventures, they marveled that he would jeopard his person so alone. But all men of worship said it were merry to be under such a chieftain that would put his person into adventure as other poor knights had.
Chapter 4.
Sir Dudden the Humorist. It seemed to me that this quaint lie was almost simply and beautifully told. But then I heard it only once, and that makes a difference. It was pleasant to the others when it was fresh, no doubt. Sir Dudden the Humorist was the first to awake, and he soon roused the rest with a practical joke of sufficiently poor quality. He tied some metal mugs to a dog's tail and turned him loose. And he tore around and around the place in a frenzy of fright, with all the other dogs bellowing after him and battering and crashing against everything that came their way and making altogether a chaos of confusion, a most deafening din and turmoil, at which every man and woman of the multitude laughed till tears flowed and some fell out of their chairs and wallowed on the floor in ecstasy. It was just like so many children. Sir Dudden was so proud of his little exploit that he could not keep from telling over and over again to weariness how the immortal idea happened to occur to him, and as in the way with humorists of his breed, he was still laughing at it after everyone else had got through. He was so set up that he concluded to make a speech, of course a humorous speech. I think I never heard so many old played-out jokes strung together in my life. He was worse than the minstrels, worse than the clowns of the circus. It seemed particularly sad to sit here 1,300 years before I was born and listen again to the poor, flat, worm-eaten jokes that had been giving me the dry gripes when I was a boy 1,300 years afterwards. It was about convinced me that there isn't anything as a new joke possibly. Everybody laughed at these antiquated things, but then they always do. I noticed that centuries later. However, of course, the scoffer didn't laugh. I mean the boy. No, he scoffed, and there wasn't anything he wouldn't scoff at. He said that most of Sir Dudden's jokes were rotten, the rest petrified. I said petrified was good, as I believe myself that the only right way to classify the majestic age of some of those jokes was by geological periods. But that neat idea hit the boy in the blank place, for geology hadn't been invented yet. However, I made note of that remark and calculated to educate the Commonwealth up to it if I pulled through. It was no use to throw a good thing away merely because the market isn't ripe yet. Now Sir Kay aroused and began to fire upon his history mill with me for fuel. It was time for me to feel serious, and I did. Sir Kay told how he encountered me in a far land of barbarians who all wore the same ridiculous garb that I did, a garb that was a work of enchantment intended to make the wearer secure from hurt by human hands. However, he had nullified the force of the enchantment by prayer, and he killed my 13 knights in 3 hours of battle, and taken me prisoner, sparing my life in order that so strange a curiosity as I was might be exhibited to wonder and admiration of the king's court. He spoke of me all the time in the blandest way as this prodigious giant and this horrible sky-towering monster and this tusked and taloned man-devouring ogre, and everybody took all this bosh in the naivest way, and never smiled or seemed to notice that there was any discrepancy between these watered statistics and me. He said that in trying to escape from him, I sprang into the top of a tree 200 cubits high at a single bound, but he dislodged me with a stone the size of a cow, which all too brast the most of my bones, and then swore me to appear at Arthur's court for sentence. He ended by condemning me to die at noon on the 21st, and was so little concerned about it, he had stopped to yawn before he named the date. I was in a dismal state by this time. Indeed, I was hardly enough in my right mind to keep the run of a dispute that sprung up as to how I'd better be killed, the possibility of killing me being doubted by some because of the enchantment of my clothes. And it was nothing but an ordinary suit of $15 slop shops. Still, I was sane enough to notice this detail, to wit, many of the terms used in this most matter-of-fact way by this great assemblage of the first ladies and gentlemen of the land would have been made a Comanche blush. Indecency is too mild a term to convey the idea. However, I read Tom Jones and Roderick Random and other books of that kind, and knew that the highest first ladies and gentlemen in England had remained little or no cleaner than their talk, and in morals and conduct, which such implies, clearly up to 100 years ago. In fact, clear into our own 19th century. In which century, broadly speaking, the earliest samples of real lady and real gentlemanship discovered in English history, or in European history for that matter, may be said to have made their first appearance. Suppose Sir Walter, instead of putting conversation to the mouth of his characters, had allowed the characters to speak for themselves. We should have had talk from Rebecca and Ivanhoe and the soft Lady Renoa, which would have embarrassed a tramp in our day. However, to the unconsciously delicate, all things are delicate, and King Arthur's people were not aware that they were indecent, and I had pretended of mind enough not to mention it. They were so troubled about my enchanted clothes, they were mightily relieved at last when old Merlin swept the difficulty away for them with a common sense hint. He asked them why they were all so dull. Why didn't it occur to them to strip me? In half a minute I was naked as a pair of tongs, and dear, dear to think of it, I was the only one embarrassed here. Everybody discussed me and did it as unconcernedly as if they had been a cabbage. Queen Guinevere was as naively interested as the rest, and said she had never seen anybody with legs just like mine before. It was the only compliment I got, if it was a compliment. Finally, I was carried off in one direction, my perilous clothes into another. I was shoved into a dark and narrow cell in a dungeon with some scant remnants for dinner, some moldy straw for a bed, and no end of rats for company.
Chapter 5, An Inspiration. I was so tired that even my fears were not able to keep me awake long. When I next came to myself, I seemed to have been asleep for a very long time. My first thought was, well, what an astonishing dream I've had. I reckon I've waked only just in time to keep from being hanged or drowned or burned or something. I'll nap again till the whistle blows, and then I'll go down to the arms factory and have it out with Hercules. But just as I heard the harsh music of rusty chains and bolts, a light flashed in my eyes, and that butterfly Clarence stood before me. I gasped with surprise. My breath almost got away from me. "What?" I said. "You here yet? Go along with the rest of the dream. Scatter!" But he only laughed in his light-hearted way and fell to making fun of my sorry plight. "All right," I said resignedly. Let the dream go on. I'm in no hurry." "Prithee, what dream?" "What dream? Why, the dream that I am in Arthur's court, a person who never existed, and that I am talking to you, who are nothing more than a work of the imagination." "Oh, la, indeed! And is it a dream that you are to be burned tomorrow? Answer me that." The shock that went through me was distressing. I now began to reason that my situation was in the last degree serious, dream or no dream, for I knew by past experience of the lifelike intensity of dreams that to be burned to death even in a dream would be very far from being a jest, and was a thing to be avoided by any means, fair or foul, that I could contrive. So I said beseechingly, "Now, Clarence, my good boy, only friend I've got, for you are my friend, aren't you? Don't fail me. Help me to devise some way of escaping from this place." "Now do but hear thyself escape. Why, man, the corridors are in guard and keep of men-at-arms." No doubt, but how many, Clarence?" Not many, I hope. Full a score. One may hope to escape. After a pause, hesitatingly, and there be other reasons, weightier. Other ones. What are they? Well, they say. Oh, but I daren't. Indeed, I daren't. Why, poor lad, what is the matter? Why do you blanch? Why do you tremble so? Oh, in sooth, there's need. I do want to tell you, but come, be a brave man. Speak out. There's a good lad. He hesitated, pulled one way by desire and the other by fear. Then he stood at the door and peeped out, listening, and finally crept close to me and put his mouth to my ear and told me his fearful news in a whisper, and with all the cowering apprehension of one who was venturing upon awful ground and speaking of things whose very mention might be frightened with death. Merlin, in his malice, has woven a spell about this dungeon, and there abides not the man in these kingdoms that would be desperate enough to essay cross these lines with you. Now, God pity me, I have told it. Be kind to me. Be merciful to a poor boy who means thee well, for an thou betray me, I am lost. I laughed, the only really refreshing laugh I had for quite some time, and shouted, Merlin has wrought a spell. Ha ha! Merlin, forsooth, that cheap old humbug, that maundering old ass. Bosh, pure bosh, the silliest bosh in the world. Why, it does seem to me that of all the childish, idiotic, chuckle-headed, chicken-livered superstitions that ever... Oh, damn that Merlin! But Clarence had slumped to his knees before I had half finished, and he was like to go out of his mind with fright. Oh, beware! These are awful words. Any moment these walls may crumble upon us. If you say such things, oh, call them back before it is too late. Now, this strange exhibition gave me a good idea and set me to thinking. If everybody about here was so honestly and sincerely afraid of Merlin's pretend magic as Clarence was, certainly a superior man like me ought to be shrewd enough to contrive some way to take advantage of such a state of things. I went on thinking and worked out a plan. Then I said, get up, pull yourself together and look me in the eye. Do you know why I laughed? No, but for blessed lady's sake, do it no more. Well, I'll tell you why I laughed. It's because I am a magician myself. Thou! The boy recoiled a step and caught his breath, for the thing hit him rather sudden. But the aspect which he took on was very, very respectful. I took quick note of that. It indicated that a humbug didn't need to have a reputation in this asylum. People stood ready to take him at his word. Without that, I resumed. I've known Merlin 700 years, and he... 700... Don't interrupt me! He has died and come alive again 13 times and traveled under a new name every time. Smith, Jones, Robinson, Jackson, Peters, Haskins, Merlin. A new alias every time he turns up. I knew him in Egypt 300 years ago. I knew him in India 500 years ago. He is always blethering about in my way everywhere I go. He makes me tired. He don't amount to shucks as a magician, knows some of the old common tricks, but has never got beyond the rudiments and never will. He is well enough for the provinces, one-night stands and that sort of thing, you know, but dear me, he oughtn't to be set up for an expert. Anyway, not where there's a real artist. Now, look here, Clarence, I am going to stand your friend right along, and in return, you must be mine. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to get word to the king that I am a magician myself, and the supreme grand high yucca-mucka-muck, and head of the tribe at that. And I want him to be made to understand that I am just quietly arranging a little calamity here that will make the fur fly in these realms if Sir Kay's project is carried out and any harm comes to me. Will you get that to the king for me? The poor boy was in such a state that he could hardly answer me. It was pitiful to see a creature so terrified, so unnerved, so demoralized. But he promised everything, and on my side he made me promise over and over again that I would remain his friend and never turn against him or cast any enchantments upon him. Then he worked his way out, staying himself with his hand along the wall like a sick person. Presently this thought occurred to me: how heedless I have been. When the boy gets calm, he will wonder why a great magician like me should have to beg a boy like him to help him out of this place. He will put this and that together, and then he will see that I am nothing but a humbug. I worried over that heedless blunder for an hour, and called myself a great many hard names meantime. But finally it occurred to me all of a sudden that these animals didn't understand reason, that they never put this and that together, and all their talk showed that they didn't know a discrepancy when they saw it. I was at rest then, but as soon as one is at rest in this world, he goes on something else to worry about. It occurred to me that I had made another blunder. I sent that boy off to alarm his betters with a threat. I intending to invent a calamity at my leisure. Now the people who are the readiest and eagerest and willingest to swallow miracles are the very ones who are hungriest to see you perform them. Suppose I should be called on for a sample? Suppose I should be asked to name my calamity? Yes, I had made a blunder. I ought to have invented my own calamity first. What shall I do? What can I say to gain a little time? I was in trouble again, in the deepest kind of trouble. Oh, there's a footstep. Oh, they're coming. If I had only just a moment to think. Good, I got it. I'm all right. You see, it was the eclipse. It came into my mind in the nick of time how Columbus or Cortez or one of these people played an eclipse as saving Trump once on some savages, and I saw my chance. I could play it myself now, and it wouldn't be any plagiarism either, because I should get it in nearly 1,000 years ahead of those parties. Clarence came in, subdued, distressed, and said, I hasted the message to our liege, the king, and straightway he had me to his presence. He was frightened even to the morrow, and yet was minded to give order for your instant enlargement, and that you be clothed in fine raiment and lodged as befitted one so great. But then came Merlin and spoiled all, for he persuaded the king that you are mad and know not what you speak of, and said that your threat is but foolishness and idle vaporing. They disputed long, but in the end Merlin, scoffing, said, Wherefore hath he not named his brave calamity? Verily, it is because he cannot. This thrust did in a most sudden sort close the king's mouth, and he could offer not to turn the argument, and so reluctant and full loth to do you the discourtesy, he yet prayeth you do consider his perplexed case, as not noting how the matter stands, and name the calamity, if you so have determined the nature of it by the time of its coming. Oh, prithee delay not. To delay at such a time were to double and treble the perils that already compass thee about. Oh, be thou wise, name the calamity. I allowed the silence to accumulate while I got my impressiveness together, and then I said, how long have I been shut up in this hole? You were shut up yesterday when was well spent. It is 9 in the morrow. No, then I have slept well. Sure enough, 9 in the morning now, and yet it is the very complexion of midnight to a shade. This is the 20th, then. Yes, the 20th. And I am to be burned alive tomorrow, the boy shuddered. At what hour? At high noon. Now, then, I will tell you what to say. I paused and stood over that cowering lad a whole minute in awful silence. Then, in a voice deep, measured, and charged with doom, I began and rose my dramatically graded stages to my colossal climax, which I delivered in a sublime and noble a way as ever I did such a thing in my life. Go back and tell the king that at that hour I will smother the whole world in dead blackness of midnight. I will blot out the sun, and he shall never shine again. The fruits of the earth shall rot for lack of light and warmth, and the peoples of the earth shall famish and die to the last man. I had to carry the boy out myself. He sunk into such a collapse. Oh, I handed him over to the soldiers, and I went back.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. This is Mark Twain's The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Please pick up a copy at any one of our local branches to find out how the stranger works his miracles and how he does what he says he's going to do. We are the away team. I'm Will Byrne. This is Mike Breen. This is Robert Tobias. Thank you for listening. Have a good evening.